There's nothing more frustrating when you're sewing on a deadline than to have that needle keep constantly breaking. You've rethreaded the bobbin, you've rethreaded the top thread, and yet it still keeps breaking. You are beyond annoyed right now. Your sewing machine is one step away from being launched into orbit around Pluto, and you want to scream. I need you to step away from that sewing machine and take a deep breath. It sounds like you need a cup of tea. Kettle's on. Let's see if we can sort out those needle issues. This is a horizontal spool pin. One of the keys to successfully using a horizontal spool pin is to make sure you've got the right sized spool cap on the end. Now you need the spool cap because without it, the thread slides off as the sewing machine pulls it off the end. So the spool cap keeps it nice and secure and in place. But you need to be careful with the spool cap. If it's too big, the thread is going to get stuck between the reel and the base of the machine. One of the things that often gets overlooked is the actual reel of thread that you're using on your sewing machine. You have to be careful if you use this style of spool on a horizontal spool pin. This is a straight wound reel. On every straight wound reel, there's a little notch on one of these ends, and it's important that you find out where that notch is before you put the spool on the machine. There it is. It's right there. Because what happens if you put that notch to the front of the machine, as the thread's coming off the machine, it can catch in that little notch. And that stops the thread coming off the spool. Any stoppage up here by the spool pin is going to cause an issue down here at your needle. The thread is going to be pulled tight and it's going to pull on your needle and break it. Whichever type of spool you use, make sure you use the right size spool cap. And if you're using this style, the straight wound style, on a horizontal spool pin, keep that notch out of the way of the thread path. Put the reel with the notch to the back of the machine. Usually, if you're sewing to a deadline, it means you're in a little bit of a rush, and it's easy, if you think the sewing machine isn't going fast enough, to grab the fabric and pull it through as the machine is sewing to try and make it go a lot faster. The problem with doing that is if you actually pull on the machine while the needle's in the machine, it can pull on the needle and that can break it. To avoid breaking a needle in those circumstances is to actually sew at the speed that your machine is capable of going at. Don't try and help it by pulling on the fabric, just let it do its job and it will get it done a lot faster, and more importantly, with the needle intact. Depending on the size of your project, you might find that some of it actually ends up dragging on the floor. At the minute, this quilt is being held onto the sewing machine by the presser foot. When the machine is actually sewing, the weight of the quilt is also pulling on the needle. Try and roll your project up so that it's not dragging on the floor and it's closer to the machine. You need to take as much weight as possible off that needle. Bulk is another issue when it comes to breaking needles. If I raise the presser foot for a minute, you want to make sure that the layers in your project will comfortably fit between the machine and the presser foot, and there needs to be room to spare. Although most presser foots do have a little bit of wiggle room where you can raise them just a little bit higher to help get bulkier projects underneath, you still need to make sure that there's a bit of space between the foot and the project. If your sewing machine has the capability of reducing the pressure that the presser foot pushes down on your project with, then reduce that pressure. And that will give the sewing machine just a little bit of extra bounce. Increase the length of your stitches. The longer the stitch, the more chance your sewing machine has got to clear one stitch before starting the next. And that will stop the needle snagging on the project and breaking. Reduce your speed. If you can go slower through those seams, you give your machine an even better chance of being able to finish each stitch before you're asking it to make another one. Another thing to watch out for too is, although you may have your machine threaded correctly, it is incredibly easy to get the thread caught around a thread guide. Say for instance, if it got looped around this one instead of being neatly threaded through, anything like that, anywhere where your thread can get caught up, will cause the thread to stop feeding down here, and it will pull on that needle and break it. So double check. Even though you know you've threaded the machine correctly, make sure that it's going through all of the thread guides smoothly, evenly, and without jamming. The next thing that you need to watch out for if you're in a rush is those pins that are really handy in keeping your fabric together and your edges in line. You have to stop. You have to pull it out, and then you have to get your sewing machine going again. So it's easy to think that, well, actually, why bother? Why not just sew straight over the top? That way I don't have to stop, right? The problem with that is that this needle will hit that pin every single time. And it's either going to go sliding off to the front or it's going to go sliding off to the back. And depending on what speed you happen to be sewing at, there's a very good chance that when that needle hits the metal of that pin, it's going to break. So whatever time you've saved sewing straight over the top of your pins, you've just lost, because now you've got to change your needle. Take the time, take the pin out, and then sew your seam. Another thing to watch out for is the type of needle that you've actually got in your machine. If you're sewing a heavy fabric, and this is denim, and you've got a needle in here that's designed for light fabrics, going through a heavy fabric like denim, particularly if you've got more than one layer, is going to put strain on that needle. Needles come in a variety of different sizes, suitable for all different types of fabrics, from lightweight fabrics all the way through to the more heavier fabrics. So make sure that the needle that you've got is designed for the weight of the fabric that you're using. Something else to keep in mind with needles in particular is they don't last forever. Depending on how much sewing you've done with your needle, it might be time to change it out for a new one. And if you can't actually remember how much sewing you did with the needle, or how long it's been since you last used your sewing machine, change the needle. Because if you've got an older needle, if it's been well used, it's not going to be as sharp as it used to be. And that lack of sharpness, that bluntness, is going to make it go through the fabric slower. And that slowness is going to cause a backlog, and that backlog is going to pull on the needle and it's going to break. So if you're starting a new project, if you don't know how long that needle's been in there, just swap it out for another one. The other thing that you need to watch out for is the type of thread that you're actually using for your project. This is quite a thick thread, so it needs one of the thicker size needles. So you're looking at the end of the scale, the 90/14s, that kind of thing. If you try and use this with a fine needle, because the thickness of the thread is too big for the eyes in smaller needles designed for lightweight fabrics, it's going to cause friction, it's going to get stuck, it's going to pull on that needle, and you risk breaking it, the thread and the needle. The quality of your needle is also something that might make a difference on whether that needle's going to break or not. These guys, whose name I have trouble saying, so I'm not going to bother saying it, these are, in my opinion, the absolute best. These have been in the sewing machine needle business since 1851. These guys have been around since the 1930s. And again, they are incredibly proficient at making sewing machine needles. They actually started off making gramophone needles, which is why they're called organ. If you use these guys in your sewing machine, then breaking needles because of the low quality isn't something that you're going to need to worry about, because these guys make high quality needles. These, on the other hand, these are pretty much shop's own brand needles. They are of a lower quality. They tend to be a little bit cheaper. I have a video on my channel at the moment looking at the difference between brand name needles and these generic ones. I'll put a link at the top of the screen and in the description box below for you to show you what happens when you use lower quality needles. Nothing like a cup of tea to put the world to rights. I hope you liked today's video, and I hope it's helped you figure out why you get so many needles breaking. If you did like the video, give it a thumbs up, and why not check out some of the other videos that I've got on the channel using the links coming up on the screen any minute now, or the ones I'll pop in the description box for you. And why not subscribe and click that little bell just down below the screen there, so that YouTube can let you know when I've uploaded another video. Whichever video you go and check out next, hope to see you back here for the next one. And in the meantime, whatever you're sewing it with, embrace your creativity and have fun. Thank you ever so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.